Congresswoman, I start with you. Take me through, just in a big picture manner, the import of having access to Mike Pence's firsthand testimony of why he ran down the stairs, what he knew when he woke up that day, and his experience on the other end of the line from Donald Trump.
I think this is a key piece, something that we would have liked to have heard directly as the January 6th committee from the former vice president. But hearing his firsthand impressions, assuming he's going to be truthful and honest and not vague, as he's been in his book and other questioning and interviews, to really lay out what he heard and what exchange he had in his conversations from the president, but also, how that shapes what was the former president's state of mind at the time. That is, something that we've, clearly understood. Adam Schiff mentioned it a few minutes ago about, how he intended to just, leave it to him and the other Republican congressmen to essentially change the results of the election. But Mike Pence, really like no one else, has firsthand knowledge and participation in these conversations. We know the result. We know that Mike Pence did the right thing on that day, and he followed the Constitution. He didn't attempt to change the outcome of the election. But we also certainly know there was a lot of pressure applied on him to take different actions than he did. And hearing that from the former vice president himself, I think will solidify numerous reports and testimony we've had from others.
Congresswoman, we know from talking to Tim and from having access to you and other members that part of the strategy was to tell the story with or without the participation of people like Mike Pence, who refused to participate in the bipartisan congressional investigation. And from all of those people, it's pretty clear that Donald Trump's state of mind was what the committee established, that he knew he lost, that he knew the Eastman plan was both illegal and unconstitutional, and that he relied on Pence to do something that he knew was not allowed, and that's why he called him the P word and said, you're too on. I mean, we already know so much. What is it that Pence closes beyond a reasonable doubt for Jack Smith?
Well, I think it's really significant to me that, we're now talking to people who are directly, or in this investigation, they're talking to people who are directly in the orbit of the former president. They had conversations directly with him. They had spent enough time and had enough of a working relationship to understand the state of mind and to really portray the events firsthand. As you've said, we've had numerous interviews with those who were nearby, who saw and heard parts of these conversations. But to know and understand them in their entirety, I think will complete a picture. Of course, that's a picture I think we really have a lot of the elements of. I mean, we know essentially what former President Trump was trying to do, what outcome he wanted that day, and we know that Mike Pence didn't follow through with that. So those elements are already there, but I think the former vice president's testimony is necessary. I think that it is his constitutional duty to testify. And I thought it was quite interesting because they quoted his former chief of staff, Mike Short, today after the D.C. Court of Appeals decision and said, well, he will comply with the law. It's a little disappointing to me. The former vice president, the president himself has the responsibility to ensure that the laws are faithfully executed. A former vice president shouldn't just comply with the law because it's required. I mean, he should set the example for the nation. Really am very proud of what Mike Pence did that day and following the Constitution and doing the right thing for our country, our republic, but also disappointed that he's tried to evade for so long this testimony, first with the January 6th committee, now with the legal investigation by the Justice Department. But the day's finally come, and he is following the law. He's shown up and he has spoken, and I think the American people look forward to understanding the elements that he can fill in and what happened that day and leading up to January 6th.
What is your reaction to an actual insurrectionist getting an actual, not a figurative, but an actual embrace and autograph from the Republican frontrunner, the twice impeached, once indicted ex-president Donald Trump yesterday in New Hampshire?
Nothing really surprises me anymore. I think it's par for the course. And I feel like, between now and the end of the primary season to determine who's going to be on the ballot for the 2024 presidential election, we're going to see more and more of this. He's embraced the January 6th insurrectionists. He's making them heroes. He's celebrating what they did on his behalf. And that is just another element he's adding to his rallying cry. So I think we're going to hear this over and over again while the former president is on the campaign trail.
Tim Heaphy, your former colleague and Elaine's former colleague, Liz Cheney, tweeted this: Trump is embracing a January 6th defendant who called for the execution of members of Congress. To elected Republicans who have endorsed him, you are endorsing his conduct on January 6th and every day since. The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. I guess I'd ask you, Tim, today, who's winning, the good guys or the bad guys?
Look, I think the good guys are getting closer and closer, Nicole, to holding him, President Trump, and others accountable, right? Like, if you look at good guys as defined by who's on the cause of justice and the cause of accountability, then I think they're making substantial progress. The testimony of the former vice president is a big deal. And the president and others' continual embrace of charged criminals, of rioters, of insurrectionists is outrageous. So, look, I'm naive enough to think that the cause of justice, or the arc of history bends toward justice, and I think we're getting closer and closer to that.
When you see Donald Trump, I mean, it's such a split screen, not just on the right? It shows the Fisher, the actual Fisher on the right. Donald Trump is with an insurrectionist, and not just any insurrectionist. Let me read to you about the woman Donald Trump embraced literally yesterday. On January 6th, Larson Olsen climbed the scaffolding set up for Joe Biden's inauguration and held on when police tried to remove her. She later bragged on social media and in an interview that it took 6 officers to remove her. Quote, "My only regret is that I wasn't stronger, that I could not hold on longer," Larson Olsen told NBC News in an hour-long interview Friday. Larson Olsen said she believes that the members of Congress who voted to certify Joe Biden's presidential election should be executed. Quote, "The punishment for treason is death, per the Constitution," Larson Olsen said. Larson Olsen added that she would like a front seat of Mike Pence being executed and that he should be the #1 person on her list of those who committed treason. I mean, as someone who has participated in the effort for accountability for radicalized Americans from sort of Charlottesville, Tim, through January 6th. What does it say that this person now has access? No one protecting Donald Trump protected him from this person. She got so close, he hugged her, and he signed her backpack that she carried with her inside the insurrection. Where are we?
Yeah, Nicole, look, it is, again, I'll use the word outrageous and frightening. And it also is really indicative to what you were just discussing with Congresswoman Luria, which is President Trump's intent. If he is affirmatively praising and embracing people that climbed scaffolding at the Capitol, who proudly wear their sort of insurrectionism on their sleeve, then his support of them, his continual good words to them, suggests that he was on board on January 6th. Again, that's the central issue. You and I talk about this on this show all the time. The central issue for Jack Smith is, what did the president intend with his words and deeds, or lack of words or deeds, on January 6th? Did he intend that the joint session be disrupted? Statements like yesterday to this rioter, to me, are strong evidence that he intended for them to succeed, for them to do exactly what they did and potentially more. So he's just digging a deeper hole for himself legally. I'll leave it to others to assess the politics of this, but legally it is wrong-headed and will potentially give Jack Smith even more ammunition.
I mean, I guess, and again, I'm not a lawyer, lucky for everybody involved, but it seems like he's showing us his intent. We should believe him as a public posture. Is that as straightforward in a legal sense, Tim?
Yeah, you're not a lawyer, but you play one on TV. That's pretty good analysis. Yes, he continues to show us his true colors, his intent, his support for this riotous action. It is not complicated, and you don't need to be a lawyer to understand that, Nicole. It is, again, I leave it to others to game out how this plays in certain portions of the Republican primary voters, but certainly as a legal matter, it is outrageous and really telling.